So welcome to the JavaScript track. It's time to start doing a lot more programming than some of the CSS work. Some of the things we're going to learn about in JavaScript include jQuery. So jQuery's approach to doing different things. We have seen jQuery before, but we're going to kind of hit it in more detail starting now. jQuery is a really interesting framework because it used to be like really necessary. Like back when Internet Explorer was kind of doing their own thing, and then there were people that were trying to make standards. It was a mess, right? And jQuery to the rescue. So for many years, like jQuery was just by far the easiest way to do things because there's browser incompatibilities. To be honest, these days, everybody uses the standard once Internet Explorer 10 came out. So there is a lot of JavaScript that you could just use without any library. But jQuery was so important for so many years that it's just still incredibly popular. And so people, instead of using the standards, they still do it the jQuery way. And to be honest, I think the jQuery way is easier a lot of the time. So we're gonna be using jQuery through most of our JavaScript work. So the goal for this unit is just to make sure you've got some jQuery and JavaScript skills. Make sure you can make websites with interaction. So that's the basic goal. So we're going to be doing a couple of basic, just kind of getting to know you JavaScript jQuery things. We're also going to talk a lot about the references that are available to you. There's a ton of references about jQuery. It's one of the best like documented skills on the web, right? So if you want to learn about ancient Greece, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff out there too, but man, JavaScript and jQuery, like it's one of the best covered topics out there. So we're going to talk about some of the resources. Also, I just wanted to mention again, we have been doing this in the app engine track. So if you look back, I mean, we wrote movie quotes together. And some things that you kind of learned in movie quotes is the style that I like to use with name spacing, and then all the different things that you can do with jQuery. So we've already seen things like click, things like setting the value or the HTML. So a lot of this stuff we've already seen once, but I kind of wanted to do one simple example just to get us kind of going on this JavaScript track again. So jQuery is a very unique framework in that they've got this philosophy where they want to focus on some element and then they want to do things related to that element. So to be honest, the main thing that you do is you find an element on the page and you create the jQuery object, and then you can do things on the jQuery object, and it's always kind of relative to that element or that set of elements. There are actually a couple things in the framework that I wanted to mention. So DOM manipulation and CSS manipulation, those are kind of the big ones, right? Listening for events, so like adding a click listener, those things like that are important. And then kind of the ones we haven't talked about, we won't talk about much this unit either, is they do a lot to try to make animations easier. So if you don't want to use CSS animations, they make a way to do easy animations. They do a lot with communication with backends, so doing GET and POST requests via AJAX. And then there's other utilities as well. Technically, there are things in the library like GET and POST that aren't based on an element. They're just based on like it's a static function. And we'll mention those, but we won't really go into detail on those today. So that's kind of jQuery. You should already have an idea what jQuery is, right? They use this syntax where they use a $sign to create the jQuery object. So I think of it as a constructor, right? And then inside here, they use some CSS selector, right? It works out nice that you've learned all this stuff about CSS selectors because you get to use it again in jQuery. In fact, if you go look at the documentation, like half of it is about how to use CSS selectors, which to me is kind of weird because that's not really jQuery, but it is kind of neat that you get to use some skills that you've already got. So I always like that. As far as resources go, there's a couple of links here. I mean, you should just you should consider doing as many of these as you can, right? So this first one is Try jQuery. It's got some great videos. There's a guy that walks you through all the different things. The one you may have done already is the Codecademy track. It's a lot of fun. It's just got some hands-on examples. So if you want to skip videos and just go straight into doing stuff, it's great. W3 Schools is also a great reference. They've got a great set of tutorials there. And then there's also one at learnjQuery.com. I'll just kind of quickly bring up each of these pages. So the first one up is Try jQuery. It's got a bunch of videos. So you can see there's like 14 videos, and then there's code challenges, which are kind of like Codecademy. And then you can, get your badges for jQuery. It's a great track to go through. It takes a couple hours to do it, but it's really neat. The next one I'll mention is one you've probably already done, is the Codecademy one, jQuery. You can see that it's roughly a 3-hour thing. It's got these different units. It also goes into a lot of like effects and things like that, and so there's really some neat things in that one that you should look at. The one on W3 Schools is also really neat. This is more of a kind of a reference if you wanted to kind of look at some things. They do a really good job in this of providing not only walkthroughs but also a bunch of examples. Like, to be honest, this examples page is one of my favorite pages. So if you can't remember how to use exactly, like click or double click, they just go through and they show each function with an example, which is really kind of the best way to learn some of these jQuery things. So I really love this page. I think they've done a nice job of creating this page for what people need. And there are others that are like more official. So this is from jQuery, the makers themselves. It's Learn jQuery, so it's the same website. But you can go through their like JavaScript 101 and the jQuery core. There's a lot of great things in there. So to be honest, these number of resources are so well developed and so like well made. Like, there's no reason for me to do all these things, but you should know where they're at so that you can find them and you can work some of these things. We will show you some basics. It's not like I'm going to completely like sell out and say go somewhere else. But to be honest, those places are really well done, and you should check them out. The way we bring jQuery into our code is we typically use a CDN. If you would like to just download the file, it's not that big of a file, right? I mean, it's like 30K or something like that. You could certainly just download it, and then like you could put it into your App Engine site. You could serve it in the static folder, and that's fine. To be honest, usually the CDNs, they work just fine. And there's a potential that it's faster. So for example, if everybody used the same CDN and some other site, had them using this CDN, and then they visit your site, it won't have to download the file again because your browser will have that file cached. So it is kind of recommended that you go ahead and use CDNs just because there's a potential improvement. If their browser already has it cached, it'll be faster than if you host it yourself and serve it. So we're going to use these CDNs. Just kind of for fun, let's go visit this link that's up here. So this is a Google CDN, so these are hosted libraries. You can see that Google chooses to host a number of things. jQuery is by far the most popular thing on this page. But if you start getting into AngularJS, which I hope to do someday, it's also a CDN that's here. If you want to use the jQuery UI, which is kind of a competitor against Bootstrap, to be honest, you could use it here. So we're going to be using, and then there's jQuery Mobile, which is another thing. We're just going to be using a jQuery CDN. And you can see that you can just copy from here, and it'll give you whatever the newest CDN is. I'm actually going to need that link next video, so I'm just going to leave that page up. Just to kind of give a brief talk about some of the functions that are available in jQuery. Some of the ones you'll use a ton are click. So whenever you want to add a click listener to a button, you can use click. If you want to listen for keys, there's key press, key down, key up. For some reason I use key up mainly, but I'm sure key press would work just as well. And then there's some other things over here which you can use. But to be honest, the other one that I use a lot is when the document is ready. Document ready occurs when it's gotten to the bottom of the page. Then it'll call this function. Maybe not all the images are loaded, but the structure is all present, right? And so this is an easy way to just kind of put your code at the bottom, right? So if you wanted to, you could put your JavaScript up at the top, but this essentially moves it to the bottom for you, which is nice. So those are some of the listeners, and so that's one of the big reasons for using jQuery. Other things are DOM manipulations. So we've got things like if you wanted to set the text inside an element, you could do that. If you wanted to set text and HTML tags, so if you wanted to put in like a bold or something like that, or an H1, you could use HTML. These two are very similar. It's just text makes sure that it's just text, whereas HTML can be tags and text. Val would be how you pull out the value of an input field. There's also a ton of things with classes that we'll use. So there's add class, remove class, toggle class, and then CSS. This one actually lets you set a style element. So I'm fine with the name CSS, but basically you just you pass it in a property value pair, and so it'll basically let you add rules, CSS rules, into the name CSS. And so these are really popular ways for manipulating the DOM and the CSS that jQuery uses. We use those all the time. There's other things that we won't use as much here, but are important to know about, are the Ajax methods. So they've got a method called load, if you just want to take an element and just put stuff straight into it. I don't find that one quite as useful as just their get and their post. Again, all of these things, there's a regular JavaScript way to do it, and the JavaScript way to do it is totally standard now, but jQuery has been around for so long and so popular that we're going to teach you the jQuery way to do things. There are a whole bunch of other things that we won't get into. There's animations, things like sliding and fading. And then for advanced users, there's things like plugins. And then if you want to use it, there's things like jQuery UI and jQuery Mobile. These are kind of competitors to Bootstrap. I'm a Bootstrap guy, so I don't use those, but they're there if you wanted to learn more about them. To be honest, they're very separate from the jQuery core, right? They just happen to have the same name, jQuery, at the front, which kind of makes them popular by name recognition, right? So that's kind of it for the jQuery introduction. We'll see you next time when we start actually doing stuff. All right, see you then.